Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to give you the transition pictures for Pope Francis, who died today, April 21st, 2025, at the age of 88. If I say I don't normally do these things, really out of respect for the person themselves, but also for those who would mourn them. However, in the case of a significant global presence, such as Queen Elizabeth II, for example, and a pope, then I feel comfortable, moderately anyway, in breaking that rule. Besides, Pope Francis's pictures were so interesting and so moving that I thought it would be a shame not to tell you what they are. Francis had been pope since 2013. He was Argentinian, and the first pope to come from outside of Europe for centuries, possibly dating back to the 9th or 8th century. He was as well a controversial figure because of his liberal-leaning views. I mean, he wasn't in favor of women priests or deacons, but he was trying to nudge the church towards acceptance of homosexuality. He was against capitalism, people said, but in actual fact, he was against opportunistic greed that led to massive inequality economically around the world. And he wanted to champion the rights of the poor. He also took charge of the Catholic Church's long-standing sexual abuse scandal. So he was generally a force within the church and made enemies because of that. I think my conservative Catholic friends are hoping that he'll be succeeded by somebody a little bit more restrained and conservative. But since the news broke today of his death, I took a look at his energy now and did his crossover and transition pictures, and they were so interesting. When I went into that energy, he was like an Olympic swimmer standing on a diving board, but facing away from the water. And he was hesitant. But I don't think this was a fear of death, like it is with so many people. I think this was a fear of leaving life with his earthly remit unfulfilled in some way, however he viewed that. There were things he had yet to do. There were loose ends that needed tying up, and he didn't want to go and leave those behind. Yesterday, the 20th of April, he met with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. And it occurred to me that something may have been said then. Nothing ominous necessarily, nothing threatening, but something may have been said or an idea intimated that convinced Pope Francis that it was time. That even if there were loose threads that needed tying up, there was nothing more that he could do in his capacity. Somebody else now had to take up that baton and run with it. That did occur to me because at some point he fell off the diving board. He didn't leap, he just let go and fell. And he went into what seemed like the ocean. When there are huge bodies of water in the pictures, it usually relates to mourning, to tears on the earthly side, which would obviously make sense. But when people in their transition pictures fall into lakes or the ocean or whatever, they usually sink. I mean, they don't do anything. They just float and gradually descend. They're confused. They are bewildered. They don't know what to do. That wasn't true of Pope Francis. He was very deliberate immediately. He moved on to the next phase. He could see a light. He knew where he wanted to go. I assumed this was to meet Jesus, God, or whatever. And he swam towards the light with great purpose. This isn't the light, by the way. This is the light from that metaphorical chamber that I so often see, where people go before they ascend into the light. It's the point at which their consciousness crosses over and they know that they have died. They have crossed from form to formless. Interestingly, though, on the floor of the chamber there were little rocks, little round, pebbly kind of rocks. And Francis went over, sat down on the floor, and began examining these rocks. And as he picked them up and turned them over and examined them, he began to weep. He had a sense, I thought, of having fallen short. Whatever these represented in his consciousness, he had not completed what he set out to do, or he had not been as good as he could have been, or he had not been as true to Jesus's principles as he would have liked. Something like that. These were regrets or shame or guilt, I suppose even, but something that he turned over and examined, and they reminded him of the things he could have been or could have done and wasn't or didn't. And he wept. And this took a while. He was reconciling his earthly self with his spiritual remit, his soul's path. And after that, he got up and began walking up the tunnel. But there was a heaviness to him that he didn't seem able to shake off. There was something about his mortal existence that he was unhappy about, in the sense that he'd not resolved it. Maybe that's why he was hesitant to fall off the diving board, because he still felt he could do something about this, whatever it was. And there was a heaviness to his gait as he walked. It was hard for him to get up the tunnel. What's more, this heaviness meant that he wasn't aligned with the higher frequencies of the energy of ascension. Whatever he couldn't leave behind, whatever his attachments were, they were still on his shoulders. There was a staircase there, blocking out the light. He had to climb these stairs. When there's an obstacle like this that takes energy, as far as I can tell, it's about wearing down the person, inducing them to shed their mortal attachments, their ego attachments, so that it makes them lighter to lift, which you wouldn't think for a pope, but this was a man of great responsibility and great conscience, and clearly there were needs he had on the mortal side that went unmet, or desires he had that went unfulfilled. And he climbed to the top, eventually, with effort, climbed to the top of the staircase, and there was the dome of light that I always see. It doesn't exist. It's like a metaphorical thing again. This to him represented the welcoming arms of grace. But what's weird about this is that he didn't feel worthy of the grace being offered to him. Having been a servant of God most of his life, from all the way back when he was just Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio in Argentina, he didn't feel as though he'd earned God's grace. It was so bizarre. And he just stood before the light, unable to step into it. And then, to my surprise, he produced 2 of the pebbles that he'd been sorting through back in the cave. I did not expect that. He held them out towards the light I mean, they don't speak, but the feeling was one of, I have failed you. Whatever you expected of me on my soul's journey, I fell short. Look what I didn't do. Look what I didn't achieve. And I swear at that moment, I got a feeling of warmth on my back between my shoulder blades, as if warm fingers had come around, or angel wings, or whatever you want to call these things, but had come around and were coaxing me into the light. You've done enough. You did what you could. That is enough. That's all we could ask of you. Now come on in. We have things to show you. It was a dry warmth that just wrapped itself around me into my back like a bath towel, and just gradually coaxed me to step into the light. Put your pebbles down. You've done enough. You did what you could. Good job. Now come on in. And in that state of humility, he went into the light. And that was that. But when he produced the pebbles, I had tears in my eyes. I never thought that would happen. When I did pictures a long time ago for Pope John Paul, he got into this same chamber and he found there was a very strong light shining directly at him, a spotlight. And he said, I don't want that. I'm not special. And he went around the back of the dome and kind of crept in through the tradesman's entrance, as you might say. This was humility too in Pope Francis's case, but born of a different motive. He didn't feel worthy of God's grace, not because of his mortal state of simply being a man, but because he hadn't done everything he wanted to do, or hadn't achieved what he set out to do, or hadn't lived up to the principles that Jesus had taught. He regretted the politics and the power struggles that get in the way of the simplest of teachings and principles. It's about love, all of it. It's about compassion and forgiveness and walking in Jesus' footsteps. And because of politics and power struggles and so on, he wasn't able to complete his soul's remit. Not his fault, but he took it on as a burden for himself that he couldn't shed. But all we're asked to do is our best. Not be perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're asked to do our best, to fulfill our soul's path as best we can. And if we fall short, at least we tried. At least we did enough. And that's the feeling I got at the end. You've done enough. Now come on in. We got things to show you. And that's what I learned from Pope Francis. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.